So, in this video, we're going to take a closer look at the ancient Greek language and the way that English adopts both morphs and maybe sometimes whole words out of Greek to bring into its own vocabulary. So, I want to start by reminding you guys what we mean when we say, oh, English took a word out of ancient Greek. What are we actually talking about? So first off, we know now that Greek is a member of the Indo-European language family. It belongs to the Hellenic branch, which is a pretty skinny branch. There's not a lot of languages that come off it. Really just Greek comes from the Hellenic branch. So when we talk about ancient Greek, what we're really talking about is a phase of Greek called Attic Greek, which is also known as Classical Greek. So Attic Greek gets its name because it was spoken in Attica, which is a region of central Greece that the most significant city there is Athens. Now, you've probably heard of Athens. It is the capital of modern Greece, and in the ancient world, it was a humongously important city. Among other things, it was really, in many ways, the cultural center of the Greek world for many centuries. Athens was one of the biggest producers of art and, for our purposes, even more important, literature. People wrote histories there, they wrote speeches, they wrote poetry, they wrote the plays. If you've ever read like Oedipus Rex or the Medea, that was written originally in Attic or Classical Greek. And so when we look at ancient texts and we study the ancient Greek language in order to pull things from it like roots, we're usually looking at Attic Greek. There are other dialects of Greek, like Doric and so forth. They're much less well represented, though, in the textual traditions because there's just so much fewer so many fewer authors and so many fewer texts coming out of other parts of the Greek world. And frankly, often people imitated Attic Greek at different times and places because it looked like a very sophisticated and cultural, sort of highly cultural language. So even if you maybe didn't speak Attic Greek natively, you might want to try to imitate it when you write to give your writing a certain kind of cachet that, oh, this is very sophisticated stuff. So a lot of the Greek roots and affixes in general come from really this classical Greek tradition. Now, sometimes our words instead come from Koine Greek. Now, Koine Greek is actually a sort of sub-dialect of Attic, and it is a dialect that is, Attic Greek develops by about 800 BC. Koine Greek doesn't develop until about the 3rd century BC, when it comes kind of into its own. And I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but Koine Greek, it means common Greek. And it gets its name because this is the Greek that was spoken by a very widespread population. Towards the end of the 4th century BC, in the 330s BC, Alexander the Great, king of the northern Greek kingdom of Macedon, united the Greeks and the Macedonians under his rule and then set out on a large-scale campaign to defeat the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire was a very mighty empire that stretched across modern Turkey, down the eastern Mediterranean coast. It contained Egypt, it contained Mesopotamia, which is like modern Iraq, Persia, which is modern Iran, and even into Central Asia, all the way up to the Indus River, which is in modern Pakistan. So when Alexander the Great conquers that territory, and then later when that empire is broken up into multiple kingdoms run by Greeks, Greek language gets spread over a very large portion of the world. And so the people living there, they didn't have to learn Greek. Most people didn't learn Greek. But those people who were part of maybe the upper classes, they probably learned Greek because they want to kind of fit in with the new ruling class. People who are involved in the production of literature probably want to write in Greek, learn Greek and write in it so that they can, their works will be more widely read. So this kind of Greek that spreads across this large region that Greeks are now ruling becomes Koine Greek. And a big characteristic of it is it's a kind of simplified version of Attic Greek. And this is because the people who are learning it and using it, Greek might be their second, third language. And so to make it a little easier for everyone, it's a kind of stripped down version. And it's simplified in many ways, which is common for languages that get spread out like that. So Koine Greek we also pull from. Koine Greek, for instance, is the language which the New Testament of the Bible was written in. So words that come from that will come from Koine Greek rather than Classical Greek. Now, Attic Greek continues to exist and is used in other contexts, but Koine Greek is the one that sort of prevails. Both of them pretty much come to an end by the 4th century AD, but at that point, the classical Greek just dies out. Koine Greek transforms. It becomes medieval Greek, which is the Greek spoken in the Middle Ages in like Greece and Turkey, where the Byzantine Empire existed. And then from there it becomes modern Greek eventually in the 1500s. So when we talk about taking words out of Greek, this is what we mean. So now let's talk about some issues we might face in taking a Greek word and trying to create a root from it. So the first one is that the Greeks do not write with the English alphabet. They write with the Greek alphabet. So you have to transliterate Greek words to make them into English words or English morphs. This isn't a huge problem because, first of all, the English and the Greek alphabets are very similar. This is because the Greek alphabet is adopted by the Romans, and then the Roman alphabet is adopted by people living in England, and so they're fairly closely related. If you look at the English letter A and the Greek letter alpha, or the English letter B and the Greek letter beta, they're the same. A lot of these letters are exactly the same. So in general, we don't have issues of it being too far off, and really by now we have essentially all agreed on how we're going to transliterate each letter into English, and each letter has a specific way that we write it in the English language. Since we've been borrowing for so long, we've got it all figured out really well at this point. So you're not going to see like multiple spellings of the same word in English, since we've all agreed on how we would spell a Greek word when we bring it into English. The only time that sometimes we're not consistent is really with the Greek letter kappa, which can be transliterated as either a K or a C. So if you have a Greek word like skeptomai, this gives us our word skeptic, for instance, and that kappa is a K. But if you look at a word like macros in Greek, that gives us our prefix macro, and in this case the kappa became a C. This isn't something you really have to worry about though, because you don't have to do the transliteration part of this process. But yeah, that's the only time where the transliteration is a little unclear, or we kind of go back and forth on it. All right, another challenge in converting Greek words into English morphs is the issue of inflectional endings. So I introduced the concept of inflectional endings when we talked about Proto-Indo-European. I said grammatically, it's an inflectional language, and this means that a number of words, specifically adjectives, nouns, and verbs, use endings, a set of endings that they add to their roots to indicate things like number, tense, gender, case, right, all of this kind of stuff. So when you want to make a morph out of a Greek word, you have to transliterate it, but then you have to get rid of any endings or any kind of extra stuff that's on there that just has grammatical value and not semantic value. It doesn't add to the meaning of the word. So just as with Proto-Indo-European, Greek nouns have endings, have a set of different endings to indicate number, is it singular or plural, case, what's its function in the sentence, and a grammatical gender. Adjectives have endings that do the same thing, and then their verbs have endings that can indicate the person and number of the speaker, right? Is it I, you, he, she, it, we, you, they? Tense, is it present, future, past? Voice, is it active or passive? I do this, or this is done to me. They actually also have something called a middle. It gets complicated. And then mood, is it a fact, like I do this? Is it a possibility? I might do this, and so on. Okay, now because you have many possible forms of a noun or adjective, or especially a verb in Greek, Greek uses more than one stem for its vocabulary words, right? So for nouns, for instance, in order to allow nouns to make all the different possibilities here, they have what I'm going to call their base stem and their combining stem. Right, so the base stem is the basic form of the noun, and the combining stem is what you add an ending to, right, when you need an ending. And so we might get a root from each of these, right? So when we looked at mater and matra, right, this is reminiscent of how in Greek you have your Greek word for mother is miter, All right, that's your base form, which we might translate something like this. And then your combining form, we derive from something like mitros, where we take off the ending and we're left with mitra here. But those long E's here are an A in English. So yeah, it has a base form and then the combining form that it uses to give you your words with endings. And we can use either of these in English. I will note that not all nouns have these two forms. Sometimes, very frequently in fact, these are the same in Greek. So sometimes you will see two forms of the root, sometimes not. When it comes to nouns, the Greek noun is pretty complicated. I'm sorry, when it comes to verbs, the Greek verb is pretty complicated. Any given Greek verb can have about 200 forms, possible forms. So in order to create all those many forms, Greek verbs can have up to 6 stems. So that's always very intimidating when someone starts learning ancient Greek. Luckily, you don't have to worry about 6 stems in this class. There are only 2 stems, really, 2 verb stems that we use to make roots in the English language. So for any given verb, what we're usually interested in is the present active stem and the perfect passive stem. Okay. So the present active stem gives us a root that suggests an action that is happening, right? This is the doing, the sense of doing. It's doing this. When we take the perfect passive stem, on the other hand, we get a sense of a completed action, something that is having been done, right? This is an ongoing action. This is a completed action. And we're going to see that there's a bit of a difference in usage of the 2 stems. So let's look at an example. We've actually only done, I think, 1 Greek verb so far. And so we did the verb to write. And so the present active form is grapho. We transliterate it. We take off this O because that's the ending. And our root is graph. Its perfect passive stem comes from, actually, gramai. We get rid of the ending. This stuff at the beginning also is just grammatical. And then we get the root gram. Okay, so when we learn the to write root for Greek, you learn these 2 forms, graph and gram. So the graph is indicating a doing of an action. The gram indicates something that has been done. Often this passive root is used to create nouns because it is like the act of or the result of this having been done. This can be seen, for instance, if we compare like an electroencephalograph and an electroencephalogram. An electroencephalograph is an instrument that is writing out, recording the activity of the heart, of the brain, the encephalos, the brain. The electroencephalogram is the thing that has been written. It's the readout. So it's the difference between the thing doing the act of writing and the thing that was written. It's already been completed. And this kind of distinction is going to continue. We'll revisit this with Latin. We again take 2 stems from Latin verbs. One indicates an ongoing happening action, and one indicates a completed action, right? And is more often used with nouns. Okay. The last thing I want to mention in our discussion of Greek is how Greek words get into English. So Greek words rarely come directly. We don't really adopt a lot of words directly out of Greek because English speakers and Greek speakers did not overlap, right? Instead, we tend to get them via Latin. So Latin picked up Greek words and then they go from Latin into English, or sometimes via French, right? French inherited a word from Latin and then English borrowed it from French at some point. And so those words often go back that far. That being said, that's a borrowing a borrowing chain like we've talked about. But more often, arguably, English words that have Greek roots are due to classical compounding. So this is especially true in like the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, and the sort of the era during the sort of scientific movement in Europe at the time of the Enlightenment and the intellectual period there. I mentioned before that these scholars in Europe, they're all writing in Latin because you all get taught Latin at school. And then if you write in Latin, everyone across Europe can read what you wrote, no matter if they're a native Russian speaker or Italian speaker or what. But despite this, when they coin new words, very often they use Greek, not Latin. So why is that? Well, the reason is that in the ancient world, the Greeks had a very strong scientific tradition going already. The Greeks were heavily involved in the study of anatomy and physiology, right, medicine in general, as well as things like philosophy, physics, biology, chemistry. The Romans, not so much. The Romans, amazing engineers, amazing architects, they're not really interested in the theoretical stuff. So even in the ancient world, when the Romans studied the sciences, they were reading Greek texts and then using Greek words, right? They're picking up words from Greek to use in scientific contexts. And this continues, this trend continues in the sort of more modern scientific movement in Europe. And so even though they're writing in Latin, when they create a new word, they're probably already working with Greek words and Greek roots so frequently that that's what they go to. That's the well they draw from. So to go back to my favorite word, microscope, I just use it a lot, I find. Microscope comes from the modern Latin microscopium. This is coined in the 17th century when the microscope is created. And it is written originally by someone writing in Latin, in a Latin text. And yet he uses Greek roots. Micro is small, scope is look. And he does this because while Latin is the language of the science, ancient Greek scientific work underlies so much of what's going on and is the source of so much of the vocabulary that it's natural to draw from that well. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I've talked quite a lot about Greek. I love Greek. It's a great language. All right, so with that, we're going to finish up the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye.